Hey, welcome back. It's so great to see you. We are happy to have you here.
Today, we are honored to be able to share with you a little bit about parenting. As many of you know, or that have been following us, we're the parents of now 8 children. Our last child, Louis, was just born how long ago?
About 3 weeks ago.
So you're pretty busy with Louis.
Yeah, I'm pretty busy with Louis, but you know what? We have a lot of help. Ken's parents are still here helping us. And I'm realizing that, like today I was doing like some reading, some math, nursing a baby, changing diapers. And I'm realizing, okay, this is a bit more like normal life. Because if I only have to focus on the baby, that's not normal life yet. I realize there's going to be a lot of different distractions coming my way.
And we're homeschooling. Well, yeah. Janelle is doing most of the homeschooling amidst all this. So, you know, it's like
it's busy.
It's busy. Yeah. So, in the midst of this busyness, you've had a chance to read.
Okay, so one of the nice things about being like postpartum, I find like I sit in a rocking chair, nurse a baby, and then I can pick up a book and actually read it, which doesn't always happen for me. And so I'm halfway through a book about the missionaries of the poor, which is like really awesome. And I finished this book called Raising Them Right. And it's a book that I've had for probably like 2 years and haven't even opened. And it was recommended by somebody that I was watching on Instagram. And I thought, okay, that looks like a good book. So it's actually written by an Orthodox priest who then became a bishop. And then he really felt a call to a life of seclusion and became like a recluse. And he honestly was by himself for like 28 years of his life. And he only interacted with his spiritual director and I think the rector of where he was living. You know, what I thought was really beautiful is that he had a large group of, you know, spiritual children who would write to him on a daily basis. And he would get over like 40 letters a day. And he would spend most of his day corresponding with them and also in deep prayer and in fasting. Like he would hardly eat. Like I think he would drink tea and have a little bit of bread. And then if it was like a special day, he would have maybe some eggs. And yeah, so anyhow, I just found it interesting because this man who was living on his own for so much time can still impart great wisdom for parents.
So he has lots of insights on raising them right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is from like the 1800s as well. So what I find interesting is like he wasn't aware of like the technologies that we currently have. But I was thinking about this and how, you know, things that are timeless, like virtues, vices, things are the same, whether you're in like the first century or you're in our current modern time. And so I think that this is still applicable. Like timeless teaching is applicable at any time in life. The first main takeaway was that like the biggest influencer on children are their parents. And he said that a life of piety and virtue is really what's going to have the greatest impact on your child. So for the parent to have a virtuous and holy life, that is really important. Clearly, we know saints who maybe didn't come from, you know, strong faith-filled families and they still became saints. But I think for best case scenario, you want to have strong, holy parents. And I was thinking about the life of Saint Therese, because we often know Saint Therese and we don't know about her parents, but her parents just recently became saints, Saint Louis Martin and Saint Zélie Martin. And we have to remember, and I heard someone say this, that they were saints, like they were in their walk of holiness before Saint Therese even became a saint. And what's beautiful is that a lot of why she is the way she is because she was raised by these beautiful people. Okay, first point. So what I found really interesting about the author, so his name is he's actually declared a saint in the Orthodox Church. Theophan the Recluse is his name. And he talks about really basic things such as, you know, providing for your child's physical needs. So like food, sleep, cleanliness, physical activity. And he talks about how all these things have to be very direct and specific in your directions to your children. Like you can't just kind of leave it up to them. So basically, and I see this in our own home, you know, kids always wanting snacks, kids always saying, I'm hungry. And then I feel bad. I'm like, maybe they're going through a growth spurt, or maybe, he just ran, he just played ball hockey. Of course he's going to be hungry. He needs to eat something even though it's 30 minutes before supper, you know? But really that's not training them properly. And he says that like if we don't allow these children to be trained and disciplined in these lower faculties, they're really going to have a hard time saying no to things in the future. And so we as parents, we have to provide that clear direction in terms of like when we eat, what we eat, and how we eat. So this is what St. Theophan says. Place them in proper bounds early in life to strengthen them with force of habit so that they are less of a disturbance later on. And I see that, like, even I think, you know, maybe even in my own childhood where I didn't have any restraints in terms of food. I remember like just buying all kinds of treats from the corner store and just like eating as much as I wanted. And I can see how sometimes those same patterns that I had as a child still come up in my adult life because I didn't have any restraint. And I think if we can develop children to have restraint and self-control as children, that will be a huge help to them in the future. And I know you had mentioned that in a video not too long ago about, this is Dr. Sax, was that his name?
Yeah, yeah.
And he said one of the predictors of like a successful child
Yeah,
was...
Dr. Leonard Sax, I have the book actually. I brought it here. It's called The Collapse of Parenting, which is really good. And one of his chapters, if you don't mind, this complements what you're saying, is that there's 5 dimensions, psychologists say, of personality. One of them, he says, is conscientiousness, and the subcategory is self-control. And one of the major points in his book is that children who develop self-control at an early age will have much better outcomes in their life later down the road. And so it's very necessary, according to him as well, that parents be authoritative and limit the children's choices, making their choices for them sometimes. And he says that if you just give a child a whole bunch of choices thinking that they're going to make the best one, it's not going to happen. You need to be the authoritative parent in their life. And there was a number of studies that he's talked about in his book regarding self-control, which really is what this man is talking about. Now here's a quote from St. Leonard. Here's a quote from Leonard Sax.
Conscientiousness. Individuals who are more conscientious earn and save more money, even after researchers adjust for intelligence, race, ethnicity, and education. Individuals who are more conscientious are also significantly happier than individuals who are less conscientious, and they are substantially more satisfied with their lives. Other studies have shown that conscientiousness predicts better health and longer life. People who are more conscientious are less likely to become obese. They are less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. They are more likely to live longer and happier lives, and as noted above, more likely to be satisfied with their lives.
So here's one of the big points is that conscientiousness requires self-control. That's one of his points. And guess what? Every virtue, natural virtue, requires self-control. It requires us to mediate between 2 extremes. And this is what the Recluse is talking about.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I realized like even in our earlier days of parenting, I remember like being like, oh, so what do you guys want to have? Or how do you want mommy to prepare that? And like giving the kids exactly what they wanted. But really what I should have been doing is just being like, this is what we're eating and this is what you're going to have.
And everyone's going to have that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, but like retracting is more difficult than just starting the right way at the beginning.
Yes.
So any of you new parents, you know, this might be a tip for you.
Once the horses are out of the barn, it's hard to get them back.
Very much. So that was one of the things that he touches on was food, but then he also talks about sleep. And I can see this, like how it's easy for, you know, especially as we are getting some older children, how they want to stay up later or they want to sleep in longer. And, you know, the easy thing to do would be like, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want. But really, that's not truly the loving thing. And that's not going to be developing good habits for them in the future. And what he says as parents, we need to be giving the directions to these children until they are capable of, you know, sustaining that self-control themselves. And so that might be for a child who's 12, or maybe that's for a child who's 15 or 18. It really depends on the child at what stage they are capable of exercising proper virtuous living.
It's really interesting. So Dr. Leonard Sax has something about like authoritative parenting. There's the too soft parent, There's the one that's too harsh, and then he calls one the just right. And again, it's in the mean, in the mean. And the parent gives guidelines to the child, according to him, that find the balance between the two, where they know the boundaries, but they also feel loved. And the boundary without love will lead to rebellion. But the too soft, they grow up not knowing how to act later as an adult. But it's that just right discipline with love that a child needs.
Right, exactly. And I think that's important to like articulate to your children. It's like, we're doing this because this is good for you. So like even like Saint Theophan says that when we give our children food, it's important not to like get them to experience like activate like passions for like sweet things and, you know, desiring always more pleasurable food, but just giving them what will sustain them and give them strength. Yeah.
We could work on that.
We can work on that. We like treats in our home. But I think probably what he would say would be like treats are appropriate at the proper time.
Right.
Just like he has eggs on special days.
Well, within the Catholic tradition, we have times of feasting and times of penance.
Right, yeah. So another thing that he touches on is movement. And I thought this was really interesting because as a homeschooling parent, it's like we don't have the convenience of our children attending a 30-minute phys ed class every single day in their classroom. And so for us, it's something that you have to be really intentional about. And I can see like some of our kids will be like, oh, I don't really want to go do that, or I don't want to go skating, or I don't want to, you know, play this sport or whatever. And the easy thing would be like, oh yeah, that's okay, don't worry about it, you know. But the right thing would be like, it's important to exercise your body. And it's not necessarily to always be doing organized sports, but it's actually just disciplining your body, making it do things that maybe it doesn't want to do. Like getting off your chair and going outside for a walk. You know, maybe that's something that's not necessarily pleasing to you, but the fact that you've disciplined yourself and done something that your body doesn't want to do, it does incite some virtue.
I think it's important to realize too, it's always easier not to discipline children than to discipline children because then there's a resistance. And naturally we don't like that. So it's always easier when a child puts up an objection to go along with them. It's always easier. And just to be mindful of that as parents.
And he says that when a child is left up to their own will, what I found was interesting, they could develop what he says is hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and sometimes it could be slowness, lifelessness, and even laziness. So I thought that was interesting. Like when we don't discipline the body, it creates all these other problems that we don't necessarily want. So it's important to restrain and to teach and to discipline.
All right.
So now I need an action plan now that I've read this book. Okay. What are we going to do? So another thing that he touched on was forming attitudes. So maybe you feel like some of the kids in your house have certain types of attitudes or temperaments that need to be kind of trained in certain directions. Well, what I thought was interesting is he basically said that parents, we need to speak very clearly and plainly about matters of faith, about life and death, about, you know, right and wrong, good and bad. And it's through our conversations that our children will glean that wisdom. And he even talked about like the early martyrs, for example. Like they were so open with what was happening, the persecutions in the church. And the children of these people were listening to the parents have these conversations, that when it came time to it, these kids were ready to give their lives for Christ because it was just so ingrained in them. They just knew the truth. They knew the life of Christ. But I think often, like sometimes as parents, sometimes we just want to shelter our kids from some of the truth. And clearly, like we want to preserve their innocence in certain matters. But I think what he's saying is like we should not shy away from, you know, having even to be proud of our Catholic faith, to be proud of the teachings of the church and what are they, and not be afraid to be able to speak truth and boldly proclaim it among your friends or among, you know, at the shopping store or, you know, wherever you're going. And that will then shape their attitude towards different things in life. And I thought that was really interesting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there's sometimes some might have a tendency to not talk about difficult things that are happening in the world for the sake of, it might disturb their peace, for example. There is a point where you have to guard a child's innocence, as you mentioned that, but I think it's good also for children to realize, hey, like the majority of people aren't living the Catholic faith. The majority of the people in the secular society don't agree with the Catholic mindset. Even the majority of people within the pews don't agree sometimes with the Catholic Church and her teachings. Just take, for example, contraception. The majority of practicing Catholics don't agree with that. They think the Church's teaching is wrong regarding natural family planning. Even the Eucharist, for example, many Catholics don't believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. There was that famous study that came out a number of years ago. It was like a third, or I can't remember. Matthew will pop it up on the screen, the number of people that don't believe. But anyways, the kids should know that, I think. Because if they get into the world and if it's never been talked to them, like, oh, that's a surprise. What's going on here?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's another area that we could work on and just share overtly, the beauties and the treasures of our church.
Yeah, even the things like, did you know that there's some people that believe that there's many genders? That's an appropriate conversation. You don't have to get into the real fine details of exactly that, but there's people that don't believe that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, and that they should know that. That's crazy.
Right. But I mean, I wouldn't have that conversation with like our 4-year-old.
Not with our 4-year-old, but they should know that's crazy.
Yeah.
That people are confused. And with plain language like that, they're confused. They don't know the truth. That's sad. It's hurting people. It's hurting their lives.
Okay, so the last point that I want to make from this book is that he talks about worldly thinking does not satisfy, but it ignites curiosity, unhealthy curiosity. And I think that's true. Like you can see, like even when you're on social media, there's like this unhealthy curiosity of things of the world. And you just want to click on it and touch on it, and how easy it is to get sucked into this like vortex of like unhealthy curiosity.
The Dead Sea Scroll.
I've never heard that one before.
That was Father Dan.
So what he says is it's important to acquaint children with other people who are living their lives for God, whose primary goal, chief concern, is to please God. And I think that's like one of the beautiful things in terms of homeschooling is you really can select your children's friends and, bring people into your home that will, ignite a desire for more faith, a desire for God, and to see other people have great examples of people who live their life have a very active faith and active prayer life. And so I think it's just normal for them to see that. And I think it's beautiful. So that's what this saint says. He says that it's really important to, surround your children with people like that. And then he just quotes from Corinthians. He says, evil company corrupts good habits. So we want good company to help us build these good habits.
Okay. So 2 good books. This one.
Raising them right.
And The Collapse of Parenting. One written by a recluse, the other a psychologist. So, hey, thanks for listening. Share with us below what stood out to you and why, and we'll see you soon.